Join me now is the motor trade expert, Fraser Brown. Fraser, welcome to the show. Let's be honest, the government is trying to force people to buy cars they simply don't want. And the result of that now is the British motor industry is shedding thousands of jobs. And that is something we're seeing echoed across the entire European continent. Billions and billions of pounds being wiped off the industry, thousands of jobs down the toilet because they're trying to force us to buy electric cars that nobody seems to want.
Yeah, it's been a very, very difficult time over the last few years for the British motor industry. And this Labour government is insisting on changing the deadline for banning petrol and diesel cars from being 2035, which we've all been working towards for a long time, to 2030. So what does that really mean for average consumers? Well, it actually means that you are very unlikely to be able to buy a petrol or diesel car new next time you change your car, because at the moment we're working towards a 2035 deadline, and that 2035 deadline means that this year 23% of all cars registered have to be zero-emission vehicles. And next year, that moves to 28%. And that's based on us phasing out completely petrol and diesel vehicles by 2035. The Labour government is moving that to 2030. So that means that next year it won't be 28%, it'll be well over a third will have to be zero-emission vehicles. So over time, customers are going to find that they cannot buy a petrol or diesel car within 2 or 3 years as a new car, because manufacturers are restricting supply, because effectively the government is rationing petrol and diesel cars. We will only be able to purchase zero-emission vehicles in the very, very near future.
Fraser, what's happening? Like Ford today, they're begging the government to give tax breaks, to give incentives. We saw similar things in the past. I was one of the mugs who scrapped my petrol car and bought a diesel car because politicians back in the day, Gordon Brown, told me that was the right thing to do. Now I'll get charged £12.50 a day to use it. People want a carrot, not a stick. They're trying to be mandated to buy these things, and it's simply not working. Does the government have to do a radical rethink on its strategy?
I think changing from 2035 as the deadline to 2030, we're an industry. This industry takes 7 to 10 years to develop a vehicle. This industry, it's a very, very long period of time of research and development, building a vehicle, getting the supply chain in place to supply all the tooling that goes onto a production line, and working the industry is sick of dealing with uncertainties. And what the Labour government has done, in addition to what it did with the budget, is also really cripple the motor industry in this country by imposing this 2030 deadline, which, if I'm entirely honest with you, I don't think we can get there. And the people that they will impact more than anybody, this is a Labour government own goal. The people that will be impacted more than anybody is those that do not have their own driveways, because an electric vehicle is more expensive to buy new, but it's much cheaper to run if you can access domestic overnight charging. So if you can plug your car in on your drive at night, then you can have a much lower cost to actually drive your vehicle, because it will cost you about 2 pence a mile, because it's only 7 pence per kilowatt to charge your vehicle overnight. If you do not have domestic overnight charging, so if you live in a terraced house, an economy home, possibly a flat, then you will not have access to plugging your car into your domestic electricity supply. So you'll pay between 60 and 80 pence per kilowatt. That's almost the same price as driving a petrol car if you have to use public charging facilities. So about a third of the UK population do not have access to a driveway where they can access domestic charging. And as a result of that, they cannot get this lower cost ownership, and they're not going to want to pay way over the odds for an electric vehicle. Now, on the flip side, there are small businesses like this little business here in Richmond, in Yorkshire, who are selling used electric vehicles. Now, if you take something like a Jaguar I-Pace or a Tesla Model 3, when they become 3 years old, they're almost exactly the same price as a 3-year-old petrol or diesel car. If you then plug them into domestic overnight charging, it becomes probably the best value for money motoring you can get, because you could almost offset all of your monthly payments on your fuel savings. So there are real wins with electric cars, and they are right for an awful lot of people. But right now, with this change in an industry that needs long-term security, the change that the Labour government has imposed upon the industry is causing huge distress. I mean, there's more than £2 billion gone into subsidising getting electric vehicles into the marketplace to encourage retail consumers to adopt them, because retail consumers at the moment simply are not moving towards electric vehicles. The only part of the market that is corporate buyers, because there are huge tax incentives for them. So I am calling, as are many people in our industry, for this Labour government to come forward with some support, maybe 50% off VAT on electric vehicles, maybe abolish that on electric vehicles. We also need to see a significant saving. We maybe should have price parity on charging with VAT on public chargers, the same price it is for VAT and domestic setting, because we only pay 7% on domestic energy, whereas we pay 20% on chargers out in the public environment.
All right, Fraser, we have to leave it there. You certainly know your onions. Here's what I think is going to happen. I think we're going to end up like Cuba. I think people are going to buy petrol cars in 2030 and they're going to keep them on the road forever. And they're going to maintain, they're going to make do and make good. And guess what? People won't buy new cars, and there we go. There'll be more compounding of the death spiral on the British motor industry. Fraser Brown, you really know your stuff. Thank you very much for joining us here on GB News this afternoon.